welcome to Orkhammer. Today's video will be the first in a series of videos where I will compare a set of units to each other to determine the relative strength of each troop and weapon choice option. This series uses a new method for comparison that I've been having a lot of fun with, and I'm excited to reveal to you. So, let's get crumpin'. If you saw my video on which units improved and got worse in the latest Orc War Clans Battle Tome, you'll know that I was examining the damage output and the durability metrics for those units, and I kind of ran into a wall of trying to encapsulate overall how certain units would perform against each other in a real battle situation, or how they would compare against other forces units. So just taking damage and durability and not factoring anything else into account, you get some sense of the strength of a unit, but it doesn't really tell you the whole story. So other things that are important that I really wanted to be able to capture are things like battlefield geometry. So this can include the base sizes, the frontage, and by frontage I mean how much, like what the distance of the front line of your forces versus your intermediate forces. So how wide the unit is spread out when it engages an enemy. That's what we'll call frontage. Things like the weapon reach, and obviously that factors in with the base size. So you could have two units that look very similar on paper, but one of them has an extra inch of their weapon. If you just look at the damage output and durability stats, it doesn't really take into account what may become an absolutely huge advantage for one unit. So a system needs to be introduced to take all of these things into effect, and sort of the ongoing combat layout. So as one unit starts to lose numbers and the other unit that it's fighting loses numbers, if an advantage gains on one side, then you can have like envelopment type situations, and what on paper may be an even race in reality ends up swinging much more for the enveloping unit. So these weird little geometric issues have a big factor in the game, and I needed a way to come up with them. And when you're just talking about probabilities, it's really difficult to incorporate probabilities with all these crazy geometric problems. There's also issues like battle shock. So a lot of units have features that just buff their own bravery or debuff an enemy's bravery. So we need a system that's going to take in battle shock, because that might be part of the reason why the point values for a unit is what it is, because of the battle shock phase. And any type of special rules. So this would be things like after saves, things like that. So just any type of special rule that's not just to hit, to wound, rend, and damage values need to be accounted for. So all of this taken together is a pretty insane probabilities issue, and I was trying to tackle it and just coming up short and realizing this may not be the best approach. And around this time, I was inspired by this post from Warhammer Community, where they basically introduced the Gotrek Garrison model and its war scroll, and instead of just hyping it up, they actually pitted it against several other heroes, and they only fought it once each, so you didn't really get a good sense. But obviously Gotrek won all of the combats, so it's a way to show, look, this guy is worth a lot of points because he kills all these other things that are also worth a lot of points. And that got me thinking, well, a way to see if something is worth its points is to really see how it fights against other things of similar points or whatever. So this led me to, let me just implement a simulator. So what was a pretty insane probabilities problem is actually a fairly straightforward simulation task. So you have to simulate the battlefield, simulate all the models, simulate all the rules, all the dice rolling, all that stuff. And once we do this, we can simulate, 1,000,000 combats or whatever, and see if you fight a unit of X against a unit of Y, the unit of X wins 80% of the time. That's valuable information. So I've put all this together. I'm calling it the WA engine. So that's the basis. It's still a work in progress, but the basis of this will fuel my comparisons for the near future. So let's take a look at how it's built. So I had to settle on a standardized frontage, and like I said before, this is the frontage is the width of combat that you're going to be engaging with, at least in the beginning of your combat. So I'm standardizing on 320 millimeters, and this is if you take a standard 32 millimeter infantry base, like a bone splitter or an Ardboy or something like that. That's 10 of them across in a front line. So it's a fairly wide line. But it's not crazy wide. So this layout is fairly straightforward. If we're dealing with like 2-inch weapons or whatever, then you're going to get 2 ranks in. If you only have 1-inch weapons, only the first rank is going to get in. And you can see once you start laying things out on a virtual battlefield, the geometry of the base sizes is going to make a big difference in terms of how many of your people get to fight versus how many enemies are fighting back at you. Okay. So I always simulate a bunch of what I call, those were flat combat layouts, and then I start with curved combat layouts. So I take that same frontage length, which was the 320 millimeters, and bend it into an arc of 90 degrees, and then lay out the 2 troops on either side of it. So you have an advantaged side and a disadvantaged side. So I'll call the advantage side the blue side here, and the disadvantaged side is red. So the advantage side is going to get more models into combat than the disadvantage side. So you can just get some idea here. Rank 1 of the advantage side is 10 models. Rank 2 is 12 versus 9 and 7 for the disadvantage. So it's not huge. Like in reality, you're going to have a lot of times where you're going to get much more advantaged situations than this, but through all of my simulations, I started to realize that the more you advantage one side with the geometry of the layout, then just the more the numbers swing in their favor. So a lot of this game is really trying to maximize your combat layout. You want to get as many of your guys contacting as few of their guys as possible, so that when they strike back at you, they're going to remain disadvantaged. So it's a tricky game, but we have to, if we're going to compare one unit to another, we have to kind of standardize and say I'm looking at only these type of scenarios. But in reality, since the advantage always swung things in one way and the disadvantage swung things in another, I tended to just use the flat combat for most of my comparisons that we're going to go over today. But I have simulated everything and I have all the stats. It's just I ended up finding the curved combat layouts to be not that interesting to look at. They're interesting when they were very close cases, and some cases the advantage swung away in which I didn't expect. But for the most part, it's just always helps one side over the other. So understanding these battle results, here's an example. So I simulated 1,000,000 combats of a unit of 30 Savage Orcs facing off against a unit of 30 Savage Orc Morboys. And so I did it 3 times. So there's a total of 3,000,000 simulations performed. So when they face off against each other in a flat, starting with a flat geometry, the Morboys won 63% of the time. If it was curved in favor of the Champas, then the Champas won just slightly, 51% of the time. And then curved in favor of the Morboys wrecked them at 76% of the time. And there was a few draws in there. What I'm calling a draw would be, since there's battle shock in here, if at the end of a combat phase, or I'm sorry, at the end of a turn, both units have nothing left because they both battle shocked away. So only in the cases where both units completely battle shock away, or maybe one lost everything from the combat phase and the other one lost everything in the battle shock phase. Either way, at the end of a turn, if there's no units left or no models left in each unit, then it's a draw. So draw should be fairly rare. So, and all these combats, it's an even number of combats start with the Savage Orcs, and an equal number of them start with the Morboys. So I do an even number because whichever unit strikes first is obviously going to have a slight advantage. So these numbers should be balanced between the two at all times. So just looking at this is interesting. You can definitely see that the Morboys are obviously better, particularly in units of 30, but it doesn't really, what I would like to get to is an ability to say exactly how much better they are. And this, it kind of makes it look like, well, you might be inclined to say, well, they're almost twice as good as the Champas because they're winning twice as much. But that's not really the case, because they might only be 5% better, but that 5%, you compound that through several attack sequences, it's going to make them win more than 5% of the time. So the way I would quantify this is to just keep adding on, like in this example, keep adding on Champas until I get to a number where the more boys still beat them, but they only beat them just over 50% of the time. So what's the most number of Champas that it takes before the more boys start losing? That way I can quantify X number of Champas roughly equals X number of more boys. So that's the way I've kind of moved with the statistics here. So let's take a look. Looking at units of 30 for the Bonesplitterz, we can see, so on the left we have our, so 30 units of Stickas, 30 units of Champas, 30 units of more boys. I've also included as an extra column and row more boys in the battlefield condition that an enemy monster has been killed. So that's not something you have direct control of anymore. It used to be anytime a monster was killed, your more boys got better. So you can't just bring along your own monster anymore and force this condition to happen. But if it does happen, it is pretty nice. So taking a look at this table, we see the Stickas, 30 Stickas, they can reliably, that means 50% or more of the time, they beat 35 Champas. More than 50% of the time, they beat 35 more boys as well. So in a unit of 30, the 30 Stickas are pretty awesome. The only thing they don't beat is the more boys under the condition that an enemy monster has died. Obviously, the more boys become better. But it's still, this was a surprising one to me. I thought the 30 more boys would completely run over the Stickas in this case. But they still win, but it's not by much. So the 30 Stickas are pretty amazing. They're significantly better than everything, and even more boys on their best day and on their best behavior are just only slightly better than the 30 Stickas. 30 Champas are just kind of pointless. They're way worse than the Stickas. They're worse than the more boys. They are cheaper than the more boys, at least, so they have that going for them. 30 more boys are obviously worse than Stickas, but they do slight. So you can see it takes 32 Champas to roughly match a unit of 30 more boys. So they're fairly neck and neck, but the more boys do take it. All right, moving on. So I can convert that into percentages. So what percentage better are the 30 Stickas compared to 30 Champas? And that number, so if you just divide on that previous chart, I've taken all those same values and just replaced them here with their percentages. So 30 Stickas are 16.67% better than 30 Champas. And 30 Stickas are also 16.67% better than more boys, and only 10% worse than more boys in their ideal condition. So obviously the winner here is the more boys versus the Champas. They're way better if a monster has been killed, but that's pretty obvious. So this might not seem like much, just a bunch of percentages stuck in a table, but as far as I can tell, nobody has been able to successfully quantify, to actually put a number on how much better one unit is versus another before with Age of Sigmar. I could be wrong about that. Somebody can link me to something that somebody's done similar work, but as far as I know, this is the first data of its kind. So I'm pretty excited about it. Moving on, let's look at units of 20. The field evens up quite a bit when we talk about 20 models. So the Stickas have a very slight advantage over Champas, and they're very slightly behind the more boys at units of 20. And the winner would be the more boys, in that they're pretty neck and neck with the Stickas, and they do have a slight advantage of the Champas, but they have that option that if a enemy unit does die, or enemy monster does die, then they do improve. And at this point, at this unit size, the 20, there's no point advantage in the stickers versus the more boys. So at this point, it seems like if you're going with a unit at 20, unless you have a restriction of, it's I think the more boys are only battle line in Bonesplitterz. So if you're going Big Wah, maybe for whatever reason you can't take the more boys, but they do seem to be the ever so slightly better option for 20. All right. That same data put into percentages. So you can see very neck and neck for just about everything, but the Champas don't really win anybody over at the 20 size either. All right, let's move on to 10. All right, so at 10, that's where the stickers start to fall by the wayside. So it takes only 8 Champas to, so a unit of 10 stickers is roughly equivalent to 8 Champas. So the Champas have an advantage, and the more boys also have an advantage. So 10 stickers are roughly equivalent to 7 more boys. So if you're taking a unit size of 10, just don't take the stickers. Take the Champas if you are limited by that battle line issue. Otherwise, it seems like the more boys are the pretty clear favorite. You only wouldn't take more boys if you had a limitation on that battle line requirement. So overall here, the Champas seem to be kind of stuck. They're not that good. They're solidly beat by the stickers in the large unit size, and in the small unit sizes, they're bested by the more boys. The only advantage they have is that they are true battle line across everything, so pretty limited usefulness. Feel bad for the poor Champas. And here's that same data in the percentages if you're curious, but okay, moving on. So those kind of tables are interesting for comparing a specific set of units, but if I want to build up a library of information in my head or on a big table, we're going to generate a massive spreadsheet really quickly if we try to compare every unit to each other. So what I've chosen to do is take a common enemy and compare everybody to that, to say, for example, I've chosen the Stormcast Liberators with shield and hammer configuration, and take that same sort of metric that I did in the previous table, saying how many of these can this unit kill reliably, and if that other unit you're fighting is the Liberator with hammer and shield, then that will be your Liberator score. So, and these are optimally configured, so 1 in every 5 models takes a Grand Hammer, the Liberator Prime takes a Grand Hammer. So we can generate a Liberator score for every one of our units, and that score seems to roughly match the data that we saw in the previous slide. So you don't have to memorize every single table for everything. If you know the Liberator score for a unit and you know another unit's Liberator score, you can be able to tell probably how those are going to fight together. The one with the higher Liberator score is probably going to beat the one with the lower Liberator score. Now, that being said, there are some limitations to this, in that while Liberators, I think, are the best choice for being ubiquitous and something you probably see in your meta, and they're pretty just good whipping boy to pit yourself against, they are a little bit non-standard in that those Grand Hammers are actually quite strong. So you take 1 in every 5, so you're going to see actually every time you grow this number, so there's kind of hard lines at the multiples of 5. So crossing that 5 barrier and getting another Grand Hammer is kind of a big deal. So it's not a smooth curve of difficulty in these Liberator scores. So beating 4 Liberators might be very easy, but it might be very difficult to beat 5, because as soon as you hit that 5, then you're going to get a Grand Hammer in it. Or, if your unit might have no problem at all with 9, but then maybe have a tough time getting to 10. But then once you hit 10, getting to 11 is much easier. So you have these hard difficulty spikes each time you add in a Grand Hammer. And the Grand Hammers, since the pile-ins are all managed by the simulator, the Grand Hammers are going to stay at the front of the line dishing out the most damage they can. So, these things are pretty weak at the lower unit sizes, but the bigger the unit, the more grand hammers you have at the front line dishing out combat. So these scores get a little bit tough at the higher levels. So I'll call this the L. So you'll see this notation L of some numbers. That'll be the number of so L of N means N models have a greater than 50% chance to kill X Liberators. So let's take a look at this in a table. I think it'll make more sense. So in the table on the left, we have, Stickas, Champas, and Morboys again. And when it says L10, that means 10 Stickas have a greater than 50% chance to kill 6 Liberators, a unit of 6. So that's going to contain 1 Grand Hammer, and that Grand Hammer will be the prime. So a unit of 20 Stickas is going to have a greater than 50% chance to kill 16 Liberators, and that unit is going to have 3 Grand Hammers, 1 prime, 2 regular Grand Hammers. And then a unit of 30 is going to have a greater than 50% chance to kill 27 Liberators. So then on the right, I've taken that same data and then just divide it by the points that you pay for the unit. So a unit of 30 Stickas is 300 points. So for 300 points, you can kill 27 Liberators, and Liberators are 20 points each. So you're paying 11.11 points to kill each Liberator that costs 20. So if you're facing off against an enemy that's brought a bunch of units of Liberators and you brought a bunch of units of Stickas, you're gonna win. You paid just a little over half of what they did for what they're doing on the battlefield. So pretty handy. The only one that's equal to the Liberators in this table is the Stickas at the low unit size, which was, like I said, they're the worst troop choice for the unit size of 10, but they still match the Liberator. So Liberators are 20 per model, and the Stickas, what they kill is 20 points per Liberator. So you might be wondering yourself, why are the Liberators so bad? This is might be a surprise to you, maybe if you're a new player or something like that, but their stats aren't crazy bad. But I think what makes them such a problematic unit is, well, not only the price. They are 100 points for 5 is a little crazy, but their base size of 40 means that you just aren't going to get many of these guys into combat. So you're going to have a lot more people fighting you in the front than you're able to hit back with from your Stormcast. So I think this unit is really hampered by their 40 millimeter bases. They're just it's going to be hard to overwhelm any enemy. They're decently durable, but it's just if you're not hitting back with anything, you only have a handful of people at the front line hitting back. It's going to be hard to chip away at those numbers. So I'm not going to walk through every single line in these tables, so you can pause the video and take a gander at these values if you want. But this is pretty solid. I think all of your troop choices here stack up very well against Liberators, and yeah, I think it's going to be a long series of videos before I get anything that is just significantly worse than Liberators. So in the same way that I'm comparing things to Liberators, I figured it might be fun just to quickly compare some things to Ardboys. So I've generated the same type of score, but for Ardboys instead of Liberators. I should have changed these L's to A's. I apologize. So here's a hypothetical Ardboy score. So this is an unbuffed Ardboy, so there's no War Chanter, because I think if I give the Ardboys a War Chanter, I would need to give the Bonesplitterz units like a War Doc or something else. So I'll save that stuff for another video, like an Orc War Clan comparison video. But just a little teaser right now. How do Ardboys stack up against these guys? Well, the Stickas, if we're talking units of 30, 30 Stickas defeats 25 Ardboys. 25 Ardboys cost, several hundred points, like 400 and something. And 30 Stickas is 300 points. So they're just a much better value at that size, but obviously at the low unit size, they're just going to get mauled by Ardboys. So 90-point Ardboy unit is roughly equivalent to 120-point Stickas unit. So Stickas are not your tool of choice for taking out small units of Ardboys. The Champas don't fare that much better. Only in the larger unit size do they deal anything significant, which is surprising. And the Morboys are actually a pretty decent option, and particularly if the monster killed. So if a Morboy unit fighting against a large unit of Ardboys and an enemy monster was killed, then you're killing 20, and you have a 50% or more average chance of killing 29 Ardboys. So a almost maximum size unit of Ardboys can be taken out by a 360-point unit of Morboys reliably. So I think this is all great news for Bonesplitterz. It's great news for the Stickas in particular. I really think the Stickas are just the champions of this lineup. Morboys would be the second place option, just because they, particularly in the small unit size, and the losers here are kind of the Champas. They just don't. There's just better choices. I don't really see a good justification for anybody to take a unit of Champas. So my final thought: get out there and build those Stickas. They are a great value for what they do. They stack up well against their counterparts in the Bonesplitterz lineup, and I think they stack up well against the game as a whole. They're quite cheap, they're sturdy, they hit hard. Just bring them in big units. So the fact that I haven't seen more Bonesplitterz lists talking about multiple big blocks of 30 Stickas is a shame. So I've been running that lately in my local club, and I think my club members might be ready to rebel against me and cast me out, because it's a very brutal list to face. It's just a true green tide. It really sums up the Bonesplitter experience. Just massive walls of green guys running at you and just swarming you. You're unable to cope with the sheer numbers of them, and then with the fact that they're actually quite offensively potent at that size. It's just too much to deal with. So I think these guys are real winners. I think I've shown you the data to back that up. My whole point of this channel is I want to give opinions that are informed and not just me shooting from the hip. So if you have any ideas for where I should go with this type of unit-to-unit comparison, I'm a little bit overwhelmed with the possibilities here of what I can compare to what. Short of inputting every single unit in the game and coming up with its Liberator scores, which would take a long time. If you have ideas on what you would like to see me tackle next, please leave it in the comments, and I will try to get to it. Obviously, I'm going to do more orc-related content next, but after that, I think there's a world of possibilities of what I can tackle. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.